Welcome pilots, Jetworks build video. First of all, apologies about the audio. I've not been too well, been kind of poorly the past couple of weeks, but getting over the cold and things now that this gorgeous Sea Vixen's built. We'll be going through the build video, however not step by step as per the build guide. I do use the build guide to follow the steps and processes. However, in my usual build fashion, I kind of think about things and what I'm doing next and what kind of suits the position on the table and what it is that I'd like to do next. So I chose to, the first step in the video will be doing the booms. I chose to do the booms first so that we could get these finished and almost in a paint ready prep state. It's all been sanded and got to a nice position, like I say, ready to paint, so that when we got to the fuselage build, these were ready to go on. Thought it would be easier to sand them and get them prepped before we get to building the fuselage, so that it all goes together and then it's just a quick process finishing off. First of all, I'd like to thank Craig. Amazing designs, and also for giving me a big battery bay. The choice to run twin 64 on 6S, yes Tobias, it's going to be a rocket, but it's partly Craig's fault and yours as well. I did think about doing a pusher, but you've converted me to the world of EDF. Craig gave us a fantastic battery bay. Confident I'll get a 4 to 5000 6S sitting in there. CG, based on the general arrangements, roughly about there. So in terms of the weight of the battery bay, the battery and what sits behind it, I'm confident I'll be able to find the CG with the 6S battery in it. Also, she will be getting tested from the bungee itself. With the CG about there, I reckon the bungee hook will be hot glued round about there. She will be getting some fiberglass cloth and a thin layer or a couple of coats of water-based acrylic or varnish just to protect the bottom, but she looks absolutely stunning. And if I can get it all done, get it painted before she goes flying, I may even beat Michael Lavero to a test pilot t-shirt, unless he gets out there and flying it. So again, apologies about jumping back and forward in the build. However, the majority of the time that's my build style as well, and how I am comfortable on the table with all things that's going on in our life at the moment. So if there's anything you'd like to see in future videos, whether it be a canopy build, how I go about building the canopies, we're obviously using Craig's fantastic clear canopies that he does for us, or whether it's a painting guide, finishing. Craig's got awesome finishing guides online with using lightweight filler, wetted down and things to a creamy consistency. Do have a look at those, but if there's anything you'd like to see, hit the comments, fill it up, and let's take it from there. So let's get into the build video, pilots.
So in this step, I'm doing boom 5 and I'm using the 3D printed boom nose cones. So I've got my 5-minute epoxy, micro balloons, and I'm using Yoo-Hoo Pour. Actually using spray M77 as well here. So on boom number 5, the 1mm slot, I'm just trimming out the excess foam that's in there, and then just using a wee push rod to smoothen it out, make sure there's a nice even gap all the way along it. As it's quite thin, it was a wee bit tricky getting it all out. And then once you've done that, get a bit of tape on the underside or top side, whatever. This part wasn't really that important to me because boom 6, I think it is, will be housing up against it as well. However, on the opposite side we'll be putting a wee bit of tape just on both sides of the slot there, so that when we apply some epoxy it keeps it nice and clean and we're just scraping away any of the excess. Now I did have an error in loading up my SD card and lost some of the data there, but I'm sure you can imagine, you know, how to put some epoxy into the wee slot there. And then obviously we put in the 1mm carbon spar, and then just allow that to go off in setting us. So we trimmed away, removed the excess tape to reveal a nice finish. And here we are, just removing the parts that we've already pre-trimmed on boom number 5, just carefully removing them out there. Some of the wee bits I'll keep just for, you know, scraps, cleaning up bits of foam and things. And then on boom number 6, removing the parts that's already been pre-cut. I left them in there just so that there was a wee bit of integrity, didn't break anything. However, at the tail piece, this part right there is for housing the elevator itself, and you don't need to take it out of both sides. So here, chosen to use spray M77 mainly for quickness. However, when sanding U-hoop, sometimes it can get a bit globby and stuff, so U-hoop 77 for laminating, fantastic. I recommend this if you've not tried it before. So a light dusting, light spray, we put it on boom number 6, and then just line it up to boom number 5, just tease into place, and then just flatten it down. Great adhesion with the spray M77. And then the same, I'm just checking that I'm putting it on the proper side here. I like dusting with the spray, and then again just offer it up. Now just be mindful, in the plans, the diagrams, there is outer markings that you need to line it up to. You don't use the inner markings there, because they're stepped down and they need to be sanded. So we're just taking my time here and just making sure that I'm doing it in opposites, as you can see there. And then moving on to boom number 7, we did 5 and 6. We're going to work our way all the way out in one side and then flip it over and do the next. Again, just carefully removing it, lining it up to see that you're quite happy with the fit. And then again, what we'll do is we'll give it a light dusting with the spray M77. Now, as you can see here, I've not actually tapered off the edges itself. I figured what's probably best for me to do is just build the booms yourself, and then carefully using a piece of, a nice sharp blade, being careful, trimming it away while it's on there, so that I can get the sand back to the shape that I need. Obviously trim off all the excess foam, but doing it this way, I figured that, you know, I probably wouldn't cut too much off. So on one side, as I say, you only need to cut the channel out in one, because this is for housing the servo cables for the elevator. But as I'm doing this, what I've got is a piece of string. I'll just put that in the channel itself and then glue everything down, so that when it comes to adding the servo later on in the build, I'll just attach it to the piece of string and then pull it through. Don't worry if the string sticks to it. It did in here. What I did, I just teased it off a wee bit, adjusted the piece of string that was in there, and then just laid it back down into position. Like I say, there's not much to worry about. So moving on to boom number 8. So now we're getting more of a curve where it should be trimmed off, and as you can see on the plan there for boom number 8, you can see the markings on it. And because it's very thin round about the outside, I thought, you know, if I try sanding that, trimming it and sanding it, I'll end up snapping it, because the bottom parts of the boom seem very delicate. And there again, when you're removing the parts that you've already pre-cut, just be careful. Like I say, Depron will snap if you've got as fat fingers as me. So what I was doing was, well, when I cut the foam, I always look to see where that famous green mark in the Depron is, and trying to get them so that if there is laminated pieces, the green markings go inside. However, at this point I just kind of noticed, and I thought, okay, so if I use that one, turn it round, I'm sticking the Depron markings on the inside. Obviously they're mirrored pieces. So then it's time to get out the magic COVID lotion, antibacterial hand lotion. A wee squirt of that and a wee rub. Obviously I think it's an alcohol solution, and that's probably what it is that helps remove the ink from the Depron. So just a wee paper tissue. I've always got plenty of these handy at the table, whether it be paint, glue, or whatever. They're always handy to have, wiping down tools and stuff. So just with a wee gentle rub, paper towel and some of the alcohol solution there, you can remove the magic green ink markings for the Depron. So once that's done, and again another wee spray with the M77, and just start to line it up based on the markings. Boom number 8. There was about 6mm gap at the nose on each side, and as you can see there, it is actually tapering off, and I'm not lining it up with the slot that goes through the centre of the boom. Do the same with the opposite side, and let's spray that and hide that Depron marking. And then just at the nose there, I'm just using my fingers to have it kind of even at both sides. And then using the point of the tail, lining those up as well, so there's a kind of even gap at both sides. And it's at this point I'm deciding, right, okay, from here on in, as it's getting thinner and shorter pieces, I will be trimming away the plan itself. I'm trimming it back so that I can actually mark on the side itself. So as you can see, there's boom number 8. Just with a wee sharp blade cutting just the inside, the part that's to be removed, or that should actually be trimmed back from there to the outer edge, tapering off. We just trim it back a wee bit and fold it, so that when we offer it up to the booms itself, we've got a bit of a mark in there, and we can see where we are supposed to actually have them mounted. Because the next one's boom 9, again, as you can see, there's a big gap in the middle there, and I just want to make sure it's lined up properly. Well, and that's clearly back to front, Baz. Yep. Oh, the confusion, the thoughts. So if you think about it hard enough, you eventually get it on in the right position. So again, lining it up at the front there, using the round about a 6mm guidance, sort of lining it up so that it was even between both sides of my fingers, finger and thumb, and deciding, okay, let's get boom number 8 lined up against 8 that's on the boom. We trim back off the centre section, just to make sure that I'm now getting them in the right position. And everything seemed to be going pretty well so far, but I thought rather than make a right bottom insert it, let's get a wee pen and mark it so that I know that they are on exactly where they should be. And it will also help with the alignment going through the middle, that stepping up, because when you're looking at it, it can look like it's straight on one side, because it's very small increments of foam as you're putting each layer on. So again, another wee dusting of the spray M77, and offer it up to position at the front, trying to keep the front as flat as possible because I'm going to be using the 3D boom noses, and I want that as flat. I will give it a wee sand prior to attaching them, but I want it as flat as possible. And then do the same with the opposite side. As you can see, I'm just flipping it over and then marking it up, and we'll do the same with the opposite side. So you get the idea, and this is kind of how I did it for throughout the whole boom process. We spray with M77, obviously mark it up there. We spray with the 77 and just push it against the table so it was stuck pretty good. Moving the string about just to make sure that that's not glued together. And then just moving through the rest of the booms, 9 and 10, finishing off this side like I have been doing, like I say, marking it up there. Doing the same on both sides, and then how we spray glue and then get them on. Doesn't take much at all with the spray M77, whereas if I was using the Yoo-Hoo, obviously, yeah, it is a contact glue, and if you were to give it airtime and stuff, yeah, it'll do the same job. But my thoughts were, due to sanding challenges with Yoo-Hoo, sometimes it can be like a big snotter. Decided, we'll just get the spray M77 on it and it'll work fantastic. So here we're using the tail boom pieces. There's wee 3mm Depron parts, and there's only one position for them to go. So I thought if I put them on, then that'll obviously line up the first part. I think it's boom number 3 it was, possibly 4. Yeah, boom number 4. So that'll line it up at the tail, and at the nose it was pretty straightforward. So like we have done with the opposite side, just working through each boom, marking it up, light spray 77, pushing it against the table just to make sure that it's stuck pretty well. So you get the idea. And it was pretty simple. Then that way I've got a nice firm boom there that I can, later on get a sharp blade and shape it back to as much as I want to remove, and then actually sand it all in one piece. Pretty straightforward process, and it worked pretty well. I was quite happy with the result. So the next step is building a horizontal stabilizer. So here we have the pieces. What I've actually done, there's the elevator. I've pre-shaped the leading edge, mixing up a wee bit of epoxy there. I've got some TPU flexible plastic hinges that I've just printed. I'll be using these in the build, and then the lower part of the horizontal stabilizer, just mixing up a wee bit of epoxy. Get some masking tape, because I didn't have a 3x1mm carbon spar. I've got the 6mm. I just sliced right through the bottom stabilizer, place a 1mm spar in position, and then offer up the other part of the Depron. And in that way I've got the spacing required to put a 6mm slot in. And then using 5-minute epoxy, I'm just putting a small amount in the groove there where it's taped up, and just squeezing it together so there's glue on both sides. Slide in the 6mm spar and just let it sit there, let it go off. So on the elevator itself, I've got I'd marked them kind of evenly, a couple of big TPU tabs in the middle, and then small ones on the outer sides. That mark in the middle is roughly where the push, the control horn's going to go. And then what I've got done, once the the epoxy had cured on the tabs, just offered up a wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour. A good even coat and make sure it was there around the outside. Smudge it about so it's as thin as possible. There's a wee bit missing at the sides there. And then put on the top part of the elevator. Just make sure it's nice and square. And then I've got a couple of books, I'll just sit on top of it, keep it pressed. So there's a nice contact between them. And then on to the horizontal stabiliser itself. Once the carbon rod had cured with the epoxy, again just small amount of Yoo-hoo, and you've got a scrap piece of foam. I'm just spreading it about so there's a nice thin even application of mostly around the outer surfaces, but yeah, there is a bit in the middle just to make sure there's good contact. And when you're spreading it about, it kind of dries a bit quicker as well. Obviously I was missing a wee bit there. Once we're happy with that, just make sure the servo markings, when you're putting the two pieces together, make sure it's the same orientation of the servo marking that you've already pre-cut. And then again, heavy book, set that on top of it and just let the glue set, ready to move on to the next step, and it'll be tidy up. So now we're going back to the build guide. This is from the start. Obviously I've built the booms. So here we are moving on to the first step. Choose your powertrain, and then it's bulkhead number 1. I'm attaching it to the fuselage belly. Very simple. I've chosen to just take the nose corner liner and stick that on just now, rather than waiting till later on in the build. Just get it together. We spot a Yoo-hoo pour, offer it up. Make sure it's nice and tacky and then just allow it to cure. Next step is the lower corner reinforcers and the fuselage sides inners. So as you can see on the belly panel here, I cut away the template and just marked it on the belly panel itself. One of the fuselage sides, I've already formed it, just be rubbing it across the edge of the table, as you can see there, and then we're just getting a wee bit closer to the shape. Now the belly panel itself, it is obviously curved, so make sure you curve that to go with the fuselage sides, and then take the sides and bend them, just form them across the edge of a table again, just to get it to follow the lines that you've pre-marked on the belly panel. So here with the lower corner reinforcers, just lining it up and then rubbing it through my finger and thumb just to get that nice bend so that it matches the shape of the belly panel itself, the curve that's in it. A wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour, offer up so that both contact surfaces have got an even coating of glue. Get a wee bit of time to air dry, and then slowly, piece by piece, just put it in. As you can see there with the lower corner reinforcer, just between your thumb and finger, just gently pull it through, and that gives you a nice wee curve. And again, just offering that up, following the lines that we've pre-marked. A bit extra glue where I missed it, and some obviously for making sure that it's attached to the bulkhead one itself. Once you've got that done, just do the same with the next two pieces as well. Just make sure you've got some glue on both the surfaces. Then the last two corner reinforcers, just a thin bead of glue, offer up the other one and just smudge it about, get a nice thin application. Now this part at the back, it does stay in the guide, you know, to leave it to help make sure there's keeps a bit of strength in it, but I chose just to get it cut out and have that there, and just remove it so that I'm not having to worry about it later. So I was just test fitting one of the side panels there. A small amount of glue gone along the contact surface, using a scrap piece of foam, just spreading it about so it was a nice even coating. And then offering up the first of the side panels. Using a small modelling pin, just tack it into place just so it was lined up nice and square with the front with bulkhead number 1. And then moving along the corner reinforcers, just making sure that it's held together pretty good and there's a nice contact all the way along it. And I'm just using again a couple of modelling pins just to just hold it into position, and one through the hole for the servos, the ESC. So I had been thinking about it and all constantly looking forward at the next step while I'm on one. What I chose to do was install one of the ESCs, and then on the opposite side, the panel that I've just fitted. Now we're hooking up, inserting the next ESC into there, because I figured when both the panels would be on, it would be quite fidgety and a bit fiddly trying to get in and make sure the wires are through and you've got a nice smooth finish. So just using some hot glue, obviously I trimmed out the ESC holes just to match the size, so it was a nice even fit. And then on the next belly panel, the side panel, sorry. A wee bit more glue along the contact surfaces. Scrap piece of foam and just smudge the glue about. And again, just at the front, wee modelling pin just to tack it into place, make sure it's nice and square. And on the inside, just so that the corner reinforcers are making contact with the side panels as well. And then at the back there, I put a good amount of Yoo-hoo in there, a scrap piece of foam, just smudging it about, spreading it about, so there's a nice even application in there. More than was needed, but we'll stick it in there anyway and make sure it's stuck. A wee bit of masking tape underneath just to hold it together and keep it nice and pinched. And then we've got the RX tray. While we're at it, I thought we'll just stick that in as well while we're letting the glue set, rather than trying to peel it all away later. Nice fit, and squeeze it together, make sure it's all nice and tight. And then move on to the next step. So we've got the ESCs already fitted, so we're now looking at the upper corner reinforcers, the magnet panel and the bridge panel as well. So there's the cockpit reinforcers, just again, small amount of glue, smudge it about, so a nice thin layer. A wee bit of glue up against the bulkhead. Line it up, and then at that part there, I realised that I didn't put any glue on the receiver tray. So just a small piece in there as well. Bit on the opposite side. And again, just offer them up. Slide them into position. And then do the same with the next two reinforcer pieces as well. Smudge it about. As you can see, I've snapped it. However, it's on the inside, it's glued together, it'll be fine. Just lining it up, trying to make sure it's all nice and square there. And then we get the bridge panel at the front. Slide that into place, just again, small amount of glue is needed there. And then the same with the magnet panel. Just slide it about, make sure that all the surfaces are a nice bit of glue in there. And I'm just using a scrap piece of foam just to clear away any of the excess. Still not decided where I'm going to position the wires and stuff. So the next step that I was really looking forward to was the wings for the EDF version. So obviously we've trimmed it out as per the plans, and then using some masking tape, preferably lower tack than the tape that I've actually got. This is just standard masking tape. It's not painter's tape that tends to work better, or frog tape. I've just received some more frog tape, so it'll save me the pain that I'm going through here. and actually trying to get it off the masking tape. Just having to be careful. I wasn't wanting to rip through the masking tape itself when obviously I'm going to be putting some epoxy in there, and I don't want it seeping through onto the build table. So carefully remove all the pieces of foam ready to accept the carbon spar reinforcers. Now there's a great wee addition to the plans, trimmed out or measured out, sorry, the size of the carbon spars that you need for the wing, and it fits absolutely perfect. So once I had them cut, I just measured it up again just to double check that it was right, separated them out for each wing, and then time to mix up some epoxy. So here I'm using the 30-minute epoxy. I've got about 7 grams of resin, and again following in 7 grams of hardener. Now added micro balloons there, and as you can see there was a fair bit of micro balloons I put in. However, it certainly didn't add any weight. I think this stuff's they should call it magic balloons, no micro balloons. And then just careful when you're mixing up, make sure it's mixed very thoroughly. The micro balloons help thicken up the epoxy as well. And then just feed it into the groove, ready to accept your carbon spars. And teasing it out to the outside of the wings itself. Well, the side, sorry. Obviously when you put in the carbon spar, yeah, it's good to have it in there in the bottom. You know, you could force it up around the carbon tube itself, but I choose to make sure that there's glue on the contact surfaces of each side of the wing plate itself. Now with this one, obviously I've not taped it up, so it was nice and clean, which you'll see on the next one. But just there, yeah, adding some extra epoxy, not actually looking at the build guide itself and thinking, oh dear, we've got extra epoxy where it shouldn't be. So just using a scrap piece of foam again, trying to remove as much as the epoxy as possible. As you can see there, put them in and then slid them towards the outside of the wing, trying to get as good a contact as possible. And then using some of the spare epoxy that was mixed up in the wee tub there, just to put over the top and make sure there's a nice flat, even finish, and sort of, you know, a good contact between the spar and the wing plate itself. And then again, using a scrap piece of foam, just spreading it out and sort of forcing it into the grooves. Not too much, but just making sure it's fed into the grooves. So as you can see on the left, the wee bit of reflection there, there's epoxy everywhere. Here I've chosen to use Craig's tip, which is a very good one. Putting some tape around the outer parts, so that when you go to start spreading the epoxy back in, you're not making an absolute mess. And it's easy to trim away, clean away, sorry, the additional epoxy. So again, another 14 grams of epoxy here. It filled the wing pretty well. And as you can see, I've marked with a pen on the main spar itself where not to go past with the epoxy. After I checked the guide again. Then again, using the wee bit that was left in the tub, putting it on top and then just forcing it in, making sure there's a nice even coverage around the spar and the wing plate itself. Then remove the tape with all the excess epoxy from it, leaving you a nice clean finish. And once that's done, just allow it to, you know, cure. We tidy up. So now that the epoxy's cured, flip it over and carefully remove the tape. And there's the additional epoxy that was in there, and just being careful with a sharp blade and just cutting out. Then remove the holes in the wing plate. Now that the wing plate itself is nice and stiff with the carbon spars in it, getting ready for the next step. So here we're moving on to the EDF unit itself. I've 3D printed them and PLA plus, and I'm hoping it's going to be alright. I'm sure it'll be fine. Here I've put on the wee plates at the opposite side, and I'm just checking that the carbon rods fit in nice and even and smooth. Then we'll get the wing templates just to make sure that everything's level when we get to fitting in the twin EDF units. And just you'll see on it, it's marked at the front, and there's two parts. One's marked for inner and one's marked for outer. Just make sure that they're lined up properly. So here's the front bulkhead, and I've fitted both of the EDF units in it. And then just moving on to the rear one and test fitting it, making sure it's a nice snug fit, not too tight and certainly not too slack, but so that it's a nice fit. I did remove it and used a wee bit of sand, a Dremel, just to sand a wee bit off. I actually sanded a bit more than I needed to. However, this is a wee bit tricky when they're not glued together. It did take a wee bit of fiddling about, as you can see. But if you take your time, and you probably got more patience than me, then yeah, you'll find this pretty simple. I'm just test fitting it to make sure it's fine, because at the top there, at the front of the wings, it should be, I think it's 255 millimeters. And then there's the rear piece. As you can see, the EDF cans itself are quite long because I'm using 6S setup. It's going to be a rocket. So if it was, just always check the size of your EDF units when you're getting ready to start building. So I kind of knew, well, I knew the EDF cans were a bit longer. So what I've done is I've went with it, and I think it was 7 millimeters I trimmed off it, keeping the back the same, because obviously we want the distance at the trailing edge of the wings exactly the same, using the marks for the exhaust bulkhead there as well, just as wheel locators. So once we had done that, and I was quite happy with the test fit, again I just sanded a little bit and removed, wee bits of excess epoxy, and then we'll test fit it again. If you can't do one side, move on to the next side. And there we go, it fitted pretty good. I was happy with that. In fact, I was more than happy. I was pretty chuffed that I managed to get the prints for the EDF bulkheads to work pretty well. And then carefully putting both sides in. It is quite tail heavy at this point, obviously with the can sitting at the back. So getting that in place, I was going, there it is, 255 millimeters. So once I've got that in place and I've pushed it right in, I think there's probably another couple of millimeters I could squeeze it in, but using the ruler at the top, yeah, it was 255. So I was totally chuffed with that. There's always a worry that you've got the measurements kind of wrong, and there is a wee bit of difference that I got kind of wrong later on in the build, but we'll cover that when we get to it. So now that's ready, I'm using 30-minute epoxy here as well, so that when I attach the EDF units to the wings, I've got time to make slight adjustments, whereas if it was 5-minute epoxy, it would probably be setting, going off and maybe before I got the chance to get it all in place and happy with the fit. Adding a wee bit of the micro balloons here as well, just to help thicken it up. Don't want the epoxy running about everywhere or coming out after I've put it in. So here I'm putting it inside the mounts itself. You can see it's not as flush a fit with using the plastic. I think the main bulkhead, I think I actually printed it at 5mm rather than the 6, which wasn't very clever. However, when I'd stuck on the end caps, the bulkhead end caps, I figured that obviously I'm going to have additional epoxy inside there anyway, so that when the wing spar tubes go through, it'll certainly force any the additional epoxy out into the small gaps that may be there, and it'll help, you know, make it more solid. So just making sure there's a good amount in each of the holes ready to accept carbon spar reinforcements. And at this point, just make sure, you know, they're in the right location. You know, you don't have your bulkheads upside down. And carefully sliding them in. And then we'll use the template to measure everything up, make sure it's nice and true, and just using a small bit of masking tape just to hold it into place. Using the markings at the bottom there at the exhaust bulkhead just as a reference. And like I say, it is a bit tail heavy, so just using a couple of spare epoxy tubes there. And before I let it go off, I'm just checking once again that we're at the 255 mark. Tiniest wee adjustments, and happy with that. So while that's setting, I'm just using some hot glue and securing to the cans itself the rear bulkhead. And then allow that to go off. Once you're happy with that, it was next to get the nose support jig on and then start getting the wing support pieces. So again, I 3D printed these, just PLA plus. I think it was 3 walls, there's no infill in it. 3 walls, 3 top, 3 bottom. And like I say, 0% infill. And here just make sure that you have the orientation correct as well, because there's a bit for the top and there's a bit for the bottom. Once you slide in, just push them right in as far as they'll go, making sure that the curve meets the wing itself. And then using a set square just to tee it up and make sure it's nice and square. There's probably a better choice of words for it. So now that that's on and setting, we're looking at the lower corner reinforcers there as well. Small amount of glue on 2 parts. Peel them apart from each other and then offer them up to the next piece. As little glue as possible. Again, just smudge it about so it's a thin application. Now there's a wee marking there on the plan for the smaller outer corner. You just need to cut that away. That's ready for accepting the 2 wing shrouds that we've just fitted as well, because there's already locator holes on the fuselage side itself also. A small amount of glue on the contact surfaces, and I smudged it about a bit as well. There was actually more glue than I usually use, but I smudged that about, got it on there, and I'm just using a scrap piece of foam just to tidy any of the excess glue away. And then on to the intakes. These were printed in lightweight PLA, 1 wall, very thin and flexible, but it looks stunning. And then a small amount of glue on the lip itself, so using both of them, just smudge it about so there's just enough to hold them together. And then I'm offering them up to the intakes and allow it to cure. So here I'm fitting them onto the EDF bell mouse, because I haven't removed the bell mouse on these units. I had receded the EDF intake, the bulkhead, sorry, enough so that it would accept the form of the bell mouth itself. So just a wee test fit. I've got it in place and just seeing how it's going to fit. Now there is a flat marker on the inside there, as you can see, and it helps you just make sure it's nice and straight and level. But this was a bit tricky because I didn't have a proper flat surface to have the lip of the intake actually stick to. It was sticking to just a thin piece of the bell mouth. But we went with it anyway. Once you've got the glue on it, obviously just let it go tacky because it's contact adhesive, and then I'll offer it up. And I actually used a wee bit of hot glue just around the outer surface, just to make sure that it fitted. Well, it was held pretty tight. The last thing I want is the units sucking in the intake and collapsing it. Just be mindful, lightweight PLA is very flexible as well. With a 3 or 4A setup, I don't see it being an issue, but me and my worldly wisdom strapped a couple of 6S units to it. So the wee test fit, glued them in place and it looked pretty well. I was pretty happy with it. So it was time to just get the locator pins into the side of the fuselage, line it up to the back and join the two pieces together. So here I think it was 30-minute epoxy again that I used, or was it? It was maybe 5. No, I think this was 5-minute epoxy, just so I wasn't sitting holding it for 30 minutes. So line it up, make sure that the tapered part at the end of the fuselage itself is lining up with the EDF bulkhead there. As you can see, I'm holding it. And squeezing in the wings as well, just to make sure that they're in the position itself in the fuselage and held in there. Once you're happy with that, just let it cure, let it set. I've got a wee bit of masking tape that I was putting over it just to keep a wee bit of tension in it, holding it together. Once we were done with that, it was to get the spine pieces and get the wiring all sorted. What I will say is, mate, before you decide on, installing your ESCs and your motors, make sure that you know your wire positioning, and mark your bullet connectors differently from each ESC and motor, so that you know that they're when you put them in and you hit that throttle position, that they work in the correct orientation, obviously, pulling the air through and pushing it out the back. So with again 3D printed exhaust tubes, small amount of glue. There's also indicators here at the back as well, to make sure that they're vertical. The plan, I'm sure, calls for spines to be in here first, but I figured it would be a bit tricky with the spine in there and trying to squeeze the motor wires and that through. So I chose to set off the thrust tubes first. Once the thrust tubes were in and glued, then flipped it over and got the right wires for each ASC and each motor, connect them up, and then there's a wee test fit just to make sure it works as well. I removed a wee bit extra there, hoping that it would have a bit more relief, but it didn't quite work out like that. It's quite tight, so just be mindful to be careful with your wiring and have it as tight and compact as possible. So again, we test fit. Tried the motors, everything was working fine. Now you might see there in front of the thrust tubes, I actually put an extra piece of Depron around it. Just U-hoop or just glued it on because obviously the cans were longer than the bulkheads itself. And then here with the exhaust bulkhead, I've just used a small amount of U-hoop on, sliding that into place, making sure that there's some in between the bulkhead and the spine, and then using the exhaust itself just to push it on and make sure that it's in the right position for once it cures like that. Then later on when I add the exhaust itself, it'll be a nice clean fit, nice finish as well. The exhaust is printed in lightweight PLA as well. I'm sure it was 2 walls I did with this, and again 0% infill, 3 bottom layers and 4 or 5 top layers. So here we are, this step we're fitting the intake cowlings that I've 3D printed them in lightweight PLA, just 2 walls, very light, there's 0% infill, so just using some CA glue, medium thickness, just using the lip inside, putting the glue around that and then sliding it into position so that the mouth of the intake fits into the wee slots, and just using a wee screwdriver to push them into the slots, make sure that they're nice and flush. I was using my finger, but it was tending to start to stick because of the CA glue, and then just hit it with a wee bit of accelerator just to hold it. I try not to use too much accelerator as the glue can become brittle rather than just letting the CA glue cure. And again, just do the same with the opposite side. A wee bit glue in the lip and offer it up and just hit it with again a wee bit accelerator and just secure them into place. Next step is fitting the tail booms by using the tail support jigs and getting the elevator assembly in place. So here I'm just actually test fitting and seeing how it looks, making sure it's in the happy with the position. It's no squint or needing adjusted and things, so I was quite happy with that. Thought I'd get a wee pen and mark things off, and then realising, well, I'm not actually going to use the pen lines. I'll just be using the marks on the wings, the wing plate, the wee lips at the tail there. So mixing up some 30-minute epoxy here. And the reason I put the intake cowlings on before this step is just for ease, to make sure that the intake was smooth and fitted properly, so I wasn't trying to squeeze it in between the tail booms that may very well be out of line possibly. That was my reasoning behind this. So again, with a 30-minute epoxy, I've put in some micro balloons, magic balloons, just to thicken it up a wee bit so it wasn't all running out and oozing across parts that I don't want it to. And then just on the contact surfaces, I put a fair amount here just to make sure that there was no gaps in there, and any excess that came out I'd just remove it with a scrap piece of foam. And this is a wee bit tricky and fiddly obviously lining up both parts at the front and the back. So now that I've used that, thought mix up another wee bit just for securing the booms to the wing plate itself. And I'm only using a bit at the front and at the back. I figured that the wing skins itself and the skins in the centre of the fuselage would hold it all in place. So here we've got the elevator jig. Put that underneath it just for the height to make sure it's, you know, in the right position. Excuse my head in the way there. And then again, just a wee bit of scrap piece of foam, trimming away, removing any of the excess epoxy. So at the front here, I'm just using a wee bit hot glue for the front of the booms, secure them into place. And once that's done, then all I need to worry about, because they'll be fixed in position, and I was happy that that is, you know, where they're going to be. Obviously allow the hot glue to cure, and then move on to the tail. Secure the tail with some masking tape, using the jig so it was nice and square, and then a wee bit extra masking tape along the centre of the booms, lining it up against the tail plate to make sure they're even at both sides, and obviously having a check along it to make sure that they're not squin or needing adjusted. But I was really happy with that. And then allow the 30-minute epoxy to cure and go off. Then remove the masking tape, and here we have the booms set in place. There was a wee bit excess came out there and stuck to the tail jig. Here my extension cable, just cutting a tiny piece of foam out, just a wee bit of relief to hold the extension cable in place, so that when I come to, what I'll do is I'll probably add a couple of thin strips of Depron, hold it in place there before I cover them up with a little bit of filler, and then sand it down ready for the paint shop. Servo wire there, and for the elevator just a wee bit of glue in the groove, the channel that I'd cut, and then slide the servo wire in just so that that's stuck in there and doesn't get blown out. Here we're just marking up the push rod where it's going to connect to the servo itself, just for alignment. I 3D printed some control horns again, and just I think it was PLA plus, and then just fit the push rod, cut out a wee channel, and then with some hot glue and get it as level as I could. Obviously just eyeballing it while it's upside down, but once it's all together, I can manually mechanically change them and make sure that they're as level as possible before we move to the radio for trimming. Now the wiring, I routed it underneath the wings and in the wee hole at the fuselage where the AC wires and that all go, just to try and keep it nice and tidy all in one location. So the next step is the wing ribs. Should be, now that we've got the booms done, for the top and the bottom, and then obviously the servo reinforcements. So these were, the big pieces were easy enough to cut out, but the small ones were very tricky, just due to the size of them. So just small amount of UHU-POR or whatever glue it is you choose to use. Very simple step. As he says, realising that he put that one in the wrong position. So we do the top, make sure there's a decent amount of glue on it, and then just moving on to the opposite side, do the same with the opposite wing. And these are for the top. That wee part, I'd actually snapped it, but again it's just a wee bit of glue, just held it back together, glue them into position. And then do the same with the bottom, but here I got the servo, figured out what I was going to do with the servo, put that in place, and then I route the wires underneath the tail boom itself, and then tuck it into the hole on the belly panel again where the ESC cables and stuff are. So again, very simple. Small amount of U-hoo pour and slide the pins into position. So here we are, just teasing through the wire, the servo wires with the extension cable for the ailerons, and then these ones slide that under the wire so that we can make sure it's set against the wing plate itself. Tidy the wires up, put them through and connect them in, and then moving on to the opposite wing. Again, there was a wee bit of trimming just for the wires, a wee bit of hot glue and slide into position. I shoved it halfway through, that way when I put the 3mm servo reinforcement plates, it's the same distance between both. And once these wing ribs are in place, I will cut a wee slot and feed the wires through. So now that we've got the intake cowling and the pieces done, we'll just move on to the exhaust. Again, 3D printed exhaust, lightweight PLA, 2 walls, 0% infill, and then just using the lip here, small amount of glue on that, and then on the surface, the contact surface itself. And as I'd done this, I kind of realised that all I really needed to do was put the glue on the contact surface, not need to put it into the rims itself. Next steps are forward fuselage pieces, the side pieces at the front, bridge panel and the nose cone. Let's get all these parts onto it. So just sizing up the side pieces. Everything looked fine. So a small amount of glue on one side and then rub both of them together, and that way you've got a nice smooth even application of glue all the way along it. Then offer it up and tack it into place. Now I used the plans, the guide itself, to show the positioning. It will butt up against the nose, but the position of it itself, the top of it sits very close to the canopy, if that makes sense. If you just reference the build guide, the diagrams that Craig's prepared, you'll see it in there. And then the belly panel, you see I've removed a small amount of foam there. That was obviously for the ASC wires that come through. There was a wee bit protruding, so I just cut a wee relief out of the foam. Again, a small amount of U-hoo contact adhesive on it. Rub the two contact surfaces together and let the glue cure a little, and then just offered it up and it stuck pretty well. So onto the bridge panels, fuselage top and inner, and the nose cone. As you can see, I've stuck the nose cone on. So here we are with the forward bridge panels. Simple, small amount of U-hoo. Rub it back and forward to make sure there's a nice even application, and stick it into place. And then the same with panel number 3. While I was lifting it off, I was giving it a wee blow, which sometimes helps the glue dry just a little. So the inner panel, as you can see, I've cut a space out of there, as it says in the plans, and I think I was actually thinking about cutting a hatch. I'm using a hatch there should I need to get into the receiver, but I'm pretty sure the receiver will pull through the hole at the front. So once the first panel's on, I was moving on to the next panel. Small amount of glue and offer that up and stick it into place. And then the top panel again, small amount of U-hoo and squidge it about so there's nice even thin coverage. Then on to the canopy. I've 3D printed a canopy like I always do. This one's in lightweight PLA. Offered that up. Fits fantastic, it's very tight, which is good. Then the ailerons, let's get onto the ailerons, let's get these sorted. So the 4 pieces, I was looking at it and thinking about the sanding position, looking at the profile of the plans and how they're actually going to go together, just to make sure I get the sanding direction right, and it's nice and even on both sides. So once I'd got it in my head where they were going to go, small amount of glue, like we do, and just rub it about so it's a thin application, and then offer it up. And just allow that glue to cure before we go sanding. So moving back to the wing skins, here we're going to do the lower wing skin. Now this was cut just slightly oversized, but there was very little that needed trimming off it. As you can see, I've cut a small relief in the wing ribs for the servo wires just to hold them into place so they're no rattling about. And then a small amount of glue on the contact surfaces. Here I'm just offering up the wing plate so that there's glue on both sides on the ribs itself, and then just allowing it to air dry slightly before I put them together. And I'm using the aileron spacing itself so that the wing plate is nice and square there. A wee bit of hot glue here that I used at the front of the wing ribs just to hold it in place a wee bit quicker, I think. And then I run some glue along the lip. If I was to do this again, I'd probably just go straight with Yoo-Hoo Pour all the way along it, because sometimes the hot glue, when you're trimming it and things, it doesn't quite, it's not as easy to cut. Obviously I'll be putting a balsa strip on the front there. So once that panel was down, using some masking tape just to tape it into place, and then do the same with the opposite side. I just cut a wee bit extra relief for the servo cable there, sorry, for the servo arm. And like we did with the first side, hit it with some glue and then, you know, offer it up, make sure it's in the right location. There's glue in both contact surfaces. Allow it to air dry, and again, gone in with a bit of hot glue. I'm needing to stop using that stuff. And then just trimming up a wee bit there at the front, just so it was a nice cleaner flow to it. And glued it down, that was fine. So once we had the bottom wing panel done, I thought I'll get on to the rear fuselage pieces itself, the nacelle, sorry. Again, using the plans, the templates, these are quite large, and I've been trimming them back and putting some small curves in it just to try and get that shape. Keep test fitting it once I was happy with it. Got some Yoo-Hoo on the outside for the contact surfaces so that it hits the fuselage and the boom, and then I'm putting some hot glue across the bulkheads. That will help secure it down pretty quick, and then keeps it into position, and it just leaves the Yoo-Hoo to cure against the fuselage and the booms itself. And then a wee bit at the front just to tack it down in place. Touch at the back, and that's it, held in pretty well. It's the only good thing about the hot glue. It kind of goes off quicker than the contact glue, and if there is any tension with the Yoo-Hoo, sometimes your parts can just ease off ever so slightly. And that was it, pretty simple. So the next step for me was to do the nacelle pieces on the base as well. So just offering them up, checking them out, seeing how it looks, and then I'm using the corner of the table just to form a curve in it, trying to get it as close to the shape of the exhaust and the nacelles as possible, so it's nice and smooth. The underside I'm not overly stressed about. I will be using some filler just to smoothen out the edges and things. It will get a coating of thin fiberglass cloth and some water-based polyacrylic or varnish just to toughen up the bottom, because she will be coming in hot, my feeling is. And obviously with no landing gear, it's just to give the best protection to the belly itself. So here we offered up some Yoo-hoo paw on the contact surfaces, gave it a wee time to air dry, and then I used some hot glue again on the EDF bulkheads just to hold it in place. A wee blow there for the Yoo-hoo paw, and then it sets. And do the same with the opposite side, just trimming it till it fits and you're happy with it. Curved on the end of the table. And then again some Yoo-hoo paw around the outsides. Offer up so both sides have got some contact glue on it. We spot of hot glue on the bulkheads. A wee blow there, and that's it stuck. So the next step is the rear fuselage upper nacelle pieces. So I'd already trimmed and test fitted these, spent about 5-10 minutes getting them to the right shape. And then again on the bulkheads, just using a spot of hot glue. I do have some Yoo-hoo paw around the outsides, where it'll be into contact with the fuselage itself and the booms. And then the opposite side, I thought I had it, but obviously there's another slight piece of trimming needing done there. Just take your time with this piece. Again, small amount of hot glue on the bulkheads. Offer up and slide into place. The hot glue keeps it in position using the bulkheads. And a wee bit at the back there just for the tail. Now here, I thought I had, we're doing the top nacelles, as you can see there. I'm just covering it, forming it on the edge of the table. The first one, I thought I had the video of that, I just forgot to push the button. But we stuck that on and it fitted pretty well. As you can see, the tip, I've got the tip running onto the intake itself. Now this one still needed a wee bit of further trimming. Like I say, they were cut oversize. Just smoothing out the glue at the front there. Again, once it's had some glue on it, offer them both up so there's glue on both surfaces, give it a wee chance to air dry slightly, and then I hit it with some hot glue over the EDF bulkhead just to hold it into place. So once we had that done, it was time to move on to the lower wing skins. Obviously these are not, the way I've went about it is not particularly, well it's certainly not as the build guide that Craig's created goes. I just do it this way for how I see it kind of fits and suits my build style, if that makes sense. So I'm test fitting the upper wing skin. Now this, I don't think, no, I didn't actually cut this one oversize. I just cut this normal as per the plans, and it fits absolutely superb. So as you can see, we've got some Yoo-hoo paw on the ribs and the front and the back. Just allow it to air dry. Cutting off some pieces of masking tape, ready to put it all together. So again, we're using the aileron positioning to keep it nice and square, or for what I see in the position that it should be. And then at the front, as you can see, I'm not using hot glue this time. I'm just going straight with the Yoo-hoo paw, adding some masking tape just to help curve it over the wing panel. and hold it into place. And then we do the same with the opposite side. As you can see, just carefully working along the wing and forming a curve into it. This time I'm ripping off the tape first, on with some Yoo-hoo pour onto the ribs, the front leading edge and the trailing edge as well. Allow it to air dry slightly. Helps for quicker and better adhesion. However, we'll still use some masking tape to hold it into place, as there will be a bit of tension in the Depron itself. Once that's done, just allow the glue to set and go off. Once I was happy that it was time to fit the ailerons. So they've been sanded and shaped here. I've printed off some TPU hinges. It's just a flexible plastic. I think it was 10mm by 20mm. Offer it up to the wing, and on the wing plate itself, the 6mm piece of foam, I'm just marking on it where I need to cut the slots for the wee tabs. And then carefully with a sharp blade, just cut a wee slot in the 6mm foam, which is right in the centre of the two obviously wing skins, both 3mm. I'm using a wee 1mm carbon spar just to widen it up ever so slightly. Wee bit of 5-minute epoxy, just forcing a wee bit in the slot. Just to make sure that there's glue in there. And then just a wee touch of the 5-minute epoxy on the tips. And then slide it into position. And obviously do the same on the opposite side. And that's about it, pilots. That's how I've went about building the Sea Vixen. Absolutely stunning model here. Great experience all the way through. There's a couple of tricky bits that I came up against, but I had great fun building it, and I can't wait to get it flown, get it up in the sky. Maybe even race Michael, who was first to build this, to getting the maiden done, and go for that Jetworks test pilot t-shirt. So once again guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope it's helped you if you choose to build the Sea Vixen, and looking forward to seeing the results of the community in their builds. Thanks again, pilots.